Okay, great. So welcome everybody. It's really exciting to see you. I hope you guys have been getting congratulations this morning from your advisors and other people in your departments and institutions. It's also been very enjoyable to have one-on-one sessions with you. I started last week. So a reminder, if you haven't booked a session with me, I think there were all but 4 people left. Please remember to do so. It's a really great opportunity to get additional advice on things like your IDP, which we're going to be talking about today. But secretly, it's also very beneficial for me so that I make sure that we are aware of everything that's going on in your lives and can give you tailored support and advice as you need it. So do it for me, if not for you. But today we have a really great workshop. This is one of the highlights of the Yale Ciencia Academy, to have the wonderful Dr. Cynthia Fuhrmann with us. She's been a longtime collaborator of the Yale Ciencia Academy. And it really is a treat for us because Cynthia is one of the world experts on career planning for graduate students, and in particular of using tools like the individual development plan to support career planning. So just briefly, Dr. Fuhrmann is currently an associate professor at the RNA Therapeutics Institute in Biochemistry and Molecular Biotechnology at UMass Chan Medical School. She has over 18 years experience founding professional development programs for graduate students, postdocs, and early career faculty, first at UCSF and now at UMass. And not just founding these programs, but really pushing forward scholarship and policy to support career development and career planning for graduate students. When she was at UCSF, she was part of the team that pioneered the individual development plans, including My IDP, which is the first online tool to support this type of planning. And her work and that of her colleagues really led to institutions like the NIH really putting a focus on career exploration and career planning being an important part of graduate training. And a required part of graduate training. So I'm always very grateful for Cynthia and her efforts with this. She's gotten recognitions from many different institutions. She's been an advisor to the NSF, to the National Academies, to the National Institutes of Health. We shared with you her bio, so please look at it if you want. You can see also the trajectory of a scientist that then went on to have a career in administration and leadership. So welcome, Cynthia. We're very, very excited to have you again with us this year.
Thank you so much. You took my breath away with such a wonderful and warm introduction. And in fact, it made the mute unmute button disappear from my Zoom. Or maybe that was the Zoom update that happened last week. I'm still trying to recover from. It's so wonderful to see you all. I really look forward to this workshop every year because YCA is such an amazing group. And so I'm really looking forward to meeting you all and getting to know you during this time together today. So we're going to do things a little bit differently than before. You kind of started by looking at some modules online through the course that we developed collaboratively together with Yale Ciencia Academy and Science Communication Lab. And we're going to build on those things. And if you weren't able to do that first module, the CPEX course, that's okay. We're going to kind of guide you through some things today, and you'll be able to jump right in on track. And you can return to that afterwards. But first, I thought that I would start because in some small groups, just to reconnect with each other. So throughout this 2-hour workshop, we're going to be breaking out into small groups. We really want to emphasize opportunities for you all to be able to chat with each other and see each other and talk through things. So we're going to give you a little bit of time here, a couple minutes per person. Well, I don't know. So maybe like about 5 minutes in this small group. Share in this small group, what's your prior experience with individual development plans? Again, an IDP or individual development plan may be required by your training program. It's now required by many, but it's basically a tool or a worksheet that you complete that kind of ends up leading towards a professional development plan for yourself. So what's your prior experience with IDPs? And then let's just share some successes, right? What's something that you've done to promote or advance your well-being or wellness in the last month? What's a success in your research or for your professional development that you've had in the past month? So just do a brief share around as a way to reconnect. I'm gonna let you, Carolina, you have the breakout rooms, is that right?
Caro, I'm setting them up, so if you want, I can take care of that. All right, I'm gonna open all rooms. If the staff can either join or we can stay in the main room. All right, see you soon.
This is a short one. Do we want to pause the recording and record again, or are we going to be like going back and forward or not?
Well, let's take an opportunity here. So that your peers can see some of the things you've been thinking about. Let's use the chat window for a moment. Actually, no, let's do a share out. I don't want to be the only one talking. We all don't want to be the only ones talking. So let's just start right away. I'd love to hear from 3 people, something about your prior experience with IDPs. And I'd love to hear from 3 people, like, one success that you've had in the past month. And then we'll kind of move on. Does that sound good? So I'm going to mute, and you can just unmute yourself and share, and we'll hear three examples of your prior experience with IDPs.
Hello, everybody. I have a student coming, so I'm trying to participate as much as I can, as early as I can. But I also wanted to say, so as our group discussed IDPs, and we pretty much all had a similar experience. It's been a part or a formality of our programs. And sometimes, depending on the intentions or the direct goals of the advisor, you might spend more time tailoring your research experience to those goals. I know my experience was we talked about the goals. They seemed like they made sense for what I wanted. And then oftentimes there's like another idea or a research idea or a set of experiments, and that kind of gets the priority. But I do remember the usefulness of the tool. And I also talked to my group about the fact that I might have been skewing my results as far as how I answered questions, because I knew I wanted to go into academia, or I thought I wanted to go into academia, and I was talking about how it would be a good exercise to try it all over again and just try to be like brutally honest with myself, because I see a lot of people getting into academia and starting that track and then switching over afterwards. And so just to mitigate how much time I waste without knowing what I want to do, I think the IDP is a great tool. So I'm going to be tuned in just so I can figure out some tips and tricks on how to do it more authentically.
I think IDPs are rather kind of inflexible. Like you have to kind of go back to every time you update or every time you have a new idea. And I don't think that happens enough for me. I had to make IDPs for a grant, or, once a year I look at it with my advisor kind of thing. But it's always so different. It changes so much from year to year, or 2 years ago or a year and a half ago. So it doesn't really get updated as my goals get updated. So it's kind of like, yeah, we planned out for this, but then, reality is so much more different. Opportunities come up, and they somehow need to fit in my IDPs, but they kind of don't anymore. And so I think it's always like a little bit hard to look back without, it's kind of like making a new IDP every year kind of thing. So it's good for like planning out what you need and what you want. But I think like the updating is very difficult, and your needs update too. So how often should we update our IDPs was always like a mystery to me.
I'm not sure how often this happens, but at least our program had to do an IDP starting like second year, but it was very informal. I think the idea was to plant the idea that we should do an IDP and to start those conversations with our mentors. But the first time I ever did it, it was super informal. So I had no rubric, no metric. It was just create an IDP. I Googled what an IDP was. But I will say that this last year, when we got the emails for going to third year, we got the link that basically Yale Ciencia also sent us with that professional IDP portal. And I think that is a little bit more helpful because it gives structure and like, yeah, probably updating it is a little bit of an annoyance, but I think at least it's got the structure there, which is kind of nice. I don't know, coming from like the computational space, I'm like, how can I make this better? How can I make this app better? So hoping to like figure that out for myself as well.
Well, I'm one of the co-authors of my IDP. So if you have ideas for improving my IDP, which there are many, so I can't make any promises, but we welcome getting ideas. And you can even just click the contact us or something link at the top of the website. And I'm one of the people who gets the emails directly. So anyway, if you're one of those people who has the desire, it satisfies the desire to share your ideas out, go for it. But yeah, so some of the things I'm hearing is that, the individual development plan process can be kind of helpful to kind of reassess your career interests, right? Or give you a framework for doing that in a thoughtful, reflective, and intentional way, rather than kind of just making a decision about a career and just assuming that it'll never change, because it is true. Most graduate students change their career interests often multiple times throughout the span of graduate training. I'm also hearing that you've already noticed, Miho, as you've created your IDPs, that it's almost like you're creating a fresh one every time. And it's true. I think your goals might shift and change a fair amount. And certainly your action plan is going to be updated each time. And something we're going to talk about today, and that I hope you start to get a sense of from doing this experience is it's kind of like the process of creating the IDP that pushes you to kind of step back and look at the bigger picture, right? And to kind of think about what's important to you. And so it's that the IDP as a tool or a framework to push you to take that time to reflect is very, very helpful. And by having that process, right, when lucky opportunities come along, or new goals, or you need to change or shift gears, it kind of empowers you to be able to make those decisions on the fly in a deliberate, intentional, and thoughtful way that's in alignment with your goals, right? And it can also empower you to say no, because I know that this other goal that I had is really important to me. It remains important to me, and I'm not going to have bandwidth for these other things. So taking this time periodically, even though it feels like you're creating a new IDP, I mean, you are, it's an iterative process, but it can help you kind of make those decisions kind of better along the way to help make sure that priorities remain intact for your own professional development. And it's fine if your priorities and such change, right? We're all learning about each other or ourselves as we go along.
Cynthia, Doctor, sorry, Raymond, I had a question.
Cynthia's fine.
Sorry. When you created, I mean, I know the IDP wasn't a new idea, but like, as you put this kind of to the broader public, what was your vision for the IDP to be used? Was it just for the student to use it as like a tool for themselves? Was it to be done with a mentor? Was it to be done, in my case, we actually do it with our directors and the mentor. And there's actually a lot of pressure and a lot of like, you have to put the right thing. I don't know. I was wondering what the original vision was when you kind of spread this more to the scientific community.
Yeah, well, the concept of using an individual development plan was first introduced in the early 2000s by a committee of mostly faculty in a scientific society, the FASEB, which is an organization, a coalition of scientific societies. And that was because postdocs had very little structure. Postdocs don't have curricula, for example, in courses. And the committee felt that the IDP framework, which came from the military and private sector and such, could be helpful for postdocs to discuss their career plans with their mentors. So it was originally brought forward for postdocs and to discuss closely with their research advisor. But the discussion with the research advisor, I think, possibly came in part because this was largely a committee of faculty who introduced the idea, right? And so, and they're kind of centered in that world of the mentee, mentor, research advisor relationship. Myself, I was at the time working in a career center, right, with career counselors, and we were in student affairs. So we're in a separate unit in the university. So took a much more student and postdoc centered view of things. So when we created My IDP as a tool, we saw it as providing students, you all as individuals, a tool to help guide you through the IDP process. And again, like your university might have worksheets that can be a tool, or Chem IDP is a different tool, or Imagine Peach. There's different tools now that have spun out since My IDP, but there wasn't really, like you guys said, there was no structure for how to create it at the time. And so we wanted to create a tool that would guide an individual to go through it on their own, because it's kind of a process that's owned by you, and then empower you to create an agenda to take to discuss with any mentor, your research advisor, your program director, other career-related mentors outside of your institution, right? Like people like Giovanna or others who are here as a support network with your peers. So the way I view an IDP is that it's a process that you create on your own, and then you don't necessarily have to bring the whole IDP to share, right? Like your list of values and things. Like, I feel like that's personal stuff, right? You can kind of take on, if you want to share those things and ask a mentor to help you synthesize this, that's totally fine. Or you can just leverage the IDP process to think about, how do I want to get the most out of this mentoring conversation or this mentoring relationship, and bring forward an agenda or what you want to share with them at any given point in time. That makes sense? We can return to that a little bit more. And I know in October, you're going to talk a little bit more about how to engage with mentors around your IDPs. Those are really great questions. So feel free to keep the questions coming. YCA team, if you can watch the chat window and interrupt me, because for some reason the chat window is not visible to me. So I'm not sure what Zoom is doing right now. But I can see you all. So just verbally interrupt me. So what are we going to do today? The work you did already was to watch the videos and do the exercises in module 1 for the career planning for early career scientist course. So that module introduced you to what the IDP process is. Through the exercises, you reflected on your skills, interests, values, needs, and preferences. You discussed some of your values, needs, and preferences in earlier peer mentoring discussions through YCA already as well. And you took one career path and you reflected on how it fit with things important to you, right? And thought about your own sense of the work, right? Like, do you feel like you can do the work? So that's related to your self-efficacy. Do you feel like there'll be strong outcomes if you move into that type of career path? Will you be happy? Will you feel it fulfilling, or will it satisfy other needs or desires that you have? And maybe what other external factors are influencing how you're thinking about your career trajectory and directions. And then there are also exercises through those modules to reflect on, how do you make career decisions generally in the past? Because you've already made decisions. You made decisions to come into graduate school, to pick a certain research lab and direction, right? A discipline that you wanted to focus on. So you've already done a lot of this work yourself already, and kind of reflecting on what works for you in that career decision-making process can help you think about how you'll ultimately choose a next step moving forward in your career. So those things were in module 1. And if you didn't have a chance to do it, that's what you can expect there. Pretty easy and helpful exercises. But we're going to take the next step today, and we're going to focus on setting your goals in your IDP. I'm going to review briefly what an IDP is, just to make sure we're on the same page, and it's kind of a reminder from module 1. We're going to talk about setting goals today. When you move into module 2, that's going to kind of dive deeper in some of the things that we're going to talk about today, and kind of beyond in the next stages of executing your plan. And then in October, you're going to talk through your full IDPs. So we're going to create action plans today, but you're going to create your full action plan as homework and bring it back for October. So that's kind of what you can expect. So what is an IDP? We've talked a little bit about tools for making IDPs. Your IDP, like My IDP, or something with prompts that guides you through the process of creating an IDP. But at its heart, an IDP can simply be a plan, right? It's a list of goals for what you want to accomplish in the next 9 to 12 months. with longer term goals, like career goals and goals in the next 2 to 5 years, informing what you want to accomplish during this time period. Because really importantly, your IDP is about your development, right? So I think we heard from some of the comments already that, you know, sometimes the IDP plan tends to be more focused on research goals. I think Joshua, you were sharing that, right? So, and research goals are one part of it. But it's good to recognize that, I think Joshua pointed this out, right? The people that you're talking to about your IDP might also end up focusing on elements of your IDP that they feel most familiar with or feels most important to them, right? So your research advisor or your program director might talk about your training goals and your research goals even more than your career-related goals. But for you, you really want to kind of make sure that your professional development and your career are really at the center of this plan. So it might look like a mapped out plan, like a Gantt chart like this one. It might look like a list where you have a goal and then the list of actions that you're going to take to achieve that goal. You might have a list that's more chronological, showing what steps you're going to take in this semester and what steps you're going to take the next semester, right? You can take whatever shape you want to. You can fill it out in something like my IDP. But for all of these, they kind of follow a process that has some core components. And so the core components were introduced in the video that you watched just really briefly, right? It's about, again, like kind of stepping back, and we call this self-assessment, but it's about kind of taking stock. What's important to me? In what ways do I want to grow, right? Like those kinds of things. How has my progress been so far? It's about exploration, right? Maybe exploring career options because you're still kind of figuring out what you want to do, or kind of narrowing down your career options, or maybe also exploring different professional development opportunities available to you to help you reach your goals. There's also, of course, the goal setting, so the writing down the goals. We're going to focus on that a fair amount today. And there's prioritization, which is also really important because I think you probably all are a lot like me, where I tend to be overambitious in my plans. So then I need to prioritize which elements are the most important, and has been raised. Those priorities might shift and change over time, which is okay, right? So there's a product of a plan, but it's good to be kind of just thoughtful. So when I create my IDP or return to it, I tend to set aside like maybe 2 hours, which gives me enough time for my brain to kind of randomly go where it wants to. I can go to a whiteboard and map things out. So I'm away from my desk. I'm in a different space where I'm thinking big picture about my goals. Yeah. Or take your laptop with my IDP or a tool on it to a coffee shop or somewhere that's different to get you into this big picture thinking. So this is what we're going to do today. We're going to map out some broad goals, see where you all are and the kinds of goals you're thinking about. We're going to develop an action plan for one goal. And then we're going to talk, then I definitely want to kind of hear your questions and where you're at related to module 1, and just, what you're thinking in terms of your career development. What challenges or questions are you having arising for that? So we'll have some dedicated time for that also during this session. But let's jump in to talk about broad goals. So we're going to start with this. So we're going to do some thinking and sharing, right? So I'm going to give you 3 minutes just to kind of free write so you have it in front of you. What are the things that you want to accomplish this year, right? Some examples are here. Maybe things related to your research, right? Maybe things related to your skills development, skills you want to work on this year, or ways that you want to expand or strengthen your network. Or maybe you're doing a job search or a postdoc position search this year, want to get started with that. Or maybe there's certain ways that you want to be engaging in the community or leadership opportunities or teaching. What are the goals that you have for this year? Preferably, especially related to your professional development. And you can make a list. You can kind of do a mind map where you're, kind of drawing circles and connecting them. Whatever you want, grab a piece of paper and a pencil or your laptop. I'm going to give you 3 minutes of quiet time. Just to preview for you, next, we're going to jump onto a Miro board on our computers. And you guys can pretend you're taking each goal and putting it on a sticky note so that we can just see for the whole group of us the types of goals that are in our kind of landscape. Okay, so 3 minutes for just writing down yourself. Okay, so that was 3 minutes. Now let's see what goals you got. So we are going to use this Miro board. Admittedly, in the past, I've used a different tool called Jamboards on Google, and I love Jamboards. And they look almost identical to this, but Jamboards don't exist anymore. They just stopped them, I guess, today. I thought it was supposed to go till mid-October. Not happy with Google right now, but I've moved into Miro. So this is a little bit experimental because I haven't done this with a large group. We did a quick test ourselves this morning, but we're going to see with the group. So please chat or let us know if this doesn't work. First, actually, I'm going to put the link in here. So you should be able to join this board. Now, as that's loading up for you, keep your screen share up right now so I can show you how this works. So what we want to do is have one Post-it for each goal. And you can like put in, I say put in like 3 to 6 goals or something. So we're going to have a lot of goals on here. If you see one that's the same as yours, if you want, you can just drag a little dot to there to say, hey, I'm doing that too or something. Or you can just add a separate one. And I'm going to try to kind of organize these thematically. The way you add a sticky is come over here. See this little sticky note page icon? You click on that and then you click a color and you should be able to type in the note and it'll appear on the board. So let's go ahead. You might have to, there, that's how it works. You might have to log in, unfortunately, but I think all it needs is your email address. If you prefer not to use the Miro board, you can chat your goals into the chat window and I'll add them to the Miro board for you. This is so fun to see your icons floating around on the screen. All right, this is wonderful. I love seeing all these goals coming and populating here. I haven't done this, used this kind of tool before where we could see all the arrows moving. So that just definitely adds another dynamic element to this experience. I feel like we've all been reduced to like little ants crawling around on the whiteboard. All right. So this might be a good place to pause because we've got such a great collection here adding in. And I'm seeing some great themes coming in, right? So I added a little bit of chronological order here. We've got people scheduling their thesis defense dates, which is very exciting, right? Got some finish up analyses and experiments, attending conferences, publishing papers, submitting grant proposals or fellowship proposals. So this is so great, doing some reading. Let's put this one over here. This is awesome. Deciding on career path. Yes. So this is so wonderful. I love all these goals. What we are going to do next is transition from this goal setting element to creating an action plan. So I'm going to give you all, how are we doing? All right, so let's pause on our Miro board. I don't know how to pause it. All right, so let me do this. Here's what we want to do next. So what I call this part is kind of writing out your broad goals, right? So I've got some broad goals, and this is a great way to just start. You can start with a Miro board if you want to, or Post-its, right, on a whiteboard. It's just getting down your ideas for the types of goals that you have and lay them all out. But if you look at any one of these, they're kind of bigger. They're pretty big, right? Like submit or write my F99 proposal, right? I'm assuming that's an ARC fellowship, which is pretty cool. So yeah, great. So that's kind of a big task, right? People spend several weeks working on this, right? There's all these different components that you have to write up and coordinate with other people to submit to NIH ultimately. And so that's like kind of a big goal, and it's ideal to break it down into smaller goals. Similar with like, writing up a paper, right? That's a pretty big goal. Your experiments and analyses, right? You can certainly break those down into smaller goals. Now, when you create your IDP, you do want it on a 9 to 12 month time period. But when you kind of shrink down, you can shrink it, of course, down to tasks that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. That's not really the specificity that I'm asking for here, but more so like what actions can you take on a month scale, right? Or a couple weeks scale. And especially kind of mapping out a little more detail in the coming few months, and then in broader detail, going out to a year. So you can kind of break down the more difficult goals, especially professional development goals that might be more difficult, and get a plan that's actionable for you. So let's talk about how to do that. I want to show you a couple of examples, and then we're going to work through an example ourselves. Okay. So when we create a plan, right, like what we just did was we kind of thought about the question, what do I want to accomplish this year, right? And you just did some great job writing down some goals, right? But then how do we break those down? So for each of these goals, maybe I want to collect and analyze data for a crystal structure. I want to write and submit a paper, right? These are very similar to what you have on the Miro board just now. We want to fill in these gaps as to what actions am I going to take. So for example, over here, you may or may not be able to read this. We are in Zoom actually. So you can zoom in if you wanted to, but by the end of November, I'm going to collect this data. By December, I'm going to do this. So we're putting kind of time frames in here to recognize how can I break this goal or writing a paper into smaller milestones that are going to feel more doable for me. And taking this step to creating an action plan is really helpful for two reasons, right? One is to help you be more concrete and be able to describe to others more concretely and specifically what the plan is, so people have shared expectations. That's especially important when you're working on a paper where you might have other people involved, etc. But also it helps you get more concrete, and it helps, again, help you define steps to get started. Thinking through what your key milestones are and actions that you want to take will also help keep you on track and help you identify challenges that might be coming forward so you can be better prepared for them. So when we write down the actions, we want to use the SMART principle. You've probably heard this before. Each action should be action-oriented. So I would suggest starting with a verb, right? It should be specific. It should be measurable, which means that someone should be able to know, they can tell whether you've achieved that action or not. You've done that action. It should have a time frame associated with it. And most of all, it should be realistic. right? So, so these are key things, and keeping the SMART principle in mind can help. So for example, here's some project types of goals, and you had projects, lots of project goals actually in that Miro board just now, for sure. Right? So how would we break out writing a paper into actions? I choose this as a starting point because it's so obvious and so easy, right? So I'm thinking that you're going to probably see this as easy. So here are the actions in my action plan for this goal. And you'll notice that each action is actually action oriented. It's got a verb. So first, the thing I'm going to do is I'm going to identify and sketch the figures, right? You know it's measurable because you're actually going to have a paper with figures on it, right? So someone can tell whether you did that or not. Then you're going to draft the materials and methods, the results, the discussion, introduction, and last, the abstract and title. This is a very common way to write a paper. And then you're going to say, okay, my initial time frame is that I'm going to, every 2 weeks, I'm going to have the next part done. Right. So I took this approach when I wrote a paper because my research advisor was very, very hands off. And so what I did was he had like 35 or more people in our research group. And I realized that if I told him, here's my plan for writing out this paper, we can make sure we're on the same page. And then I went a step further and I said, okay, we're going to be meeting next in 2 weeks. I'm going to bring to that meeting my sketches of each figure. And by saying, I could have easily just not said that and kind of left it a little wishy-washy so that he'd be like, yeah, generally that's the good plan. And I could have walked away and maybe everyone would have been satisfied. But by telling him the next step, what I'm going to deliver and when, like in this meeting, 2 Wednesdays from now, let's say, it was much more specific and I was holding myself accountable because I knew that if I told him this, he's a smart guy, some part of his brain might remember it. And then he'll be like, okay, in the next meeting, he'll be like, let's look at the figures. Or he might forget, which is also okay. But just knowing that he might remember meant that I was going to follow through on the goal. And so, you know, some of your advisors, you're like, that's not going to be a problem. They're going to be asking me the next day for the first figure. But my advisor was different. So I needed to kind of take a strategy to hold myself accountable because I had seen some grad students stay in our lab for many more years than they needed to just because the advisor was so busy. They just kind of let them wander, right? So I set out these action plan, right? I have a time frame for them and I created what I call an accountability plan. Yeah. So that's pretty straightforward for a project. But when we're doing a skill, that's a harder thing. Like what if I saw that some of you are writing out fellowships, right? I didn't see a lot of skill development goals actually on your Miro board. So that's something you might want to think about is like, what skills do I want to be working on, right? So for example, if you want to, move forward towards becoming a PI or moving into industry or whatever, some experience managing people might be helpful. And so if there's an opportunity to manage an undergraduate student, you could develop your management skills at the same time. But for those of you writing fellowships, this is also an opportunity to develop your proposal writing skills and your grant, submission skills, right? So let's say you had that as a skill development goal. You're going to submit the grant already anyway. Let's kind of just be a little more deliberate about how to do this and develop the skill longer term. So what actions would I take, right? Maybe there's a course on your campus that will teach you how to write a grant, but probably not. Probably it's you talking to people about what steps to take next, and maybe your research advisor giving you advice, right? At this stage, when you're late graduate student stage, right? I think a lot of it's up to you to be creative about how you develop your skills. So, and I think of it as this framework: getting training, practicing, and getting feedback. So we're going to practice this with that skill now. And then I'm going to have you pick a skill goal or any other type of goal and map out your own action plan for it. Okay. And for some of you, I'm gonna pause for a minute here. For some of you, these strategies for goal setting are gonna feel like fun. They're gonna feel second nature. They're gonna be exciting. You're gonna feel really productive. Like, oh, nice, I have this action plan. It's all laid out. Excellent. And for others of you, it's gonna feel annoying and time consuming and frustrating, right? And constricting. And that's okay too. So we all have different kind of approaches, work styles and approaches to our work and to our planning. And so what we want you to do is, since you're gonna be discussing your action plans in October, we want you to kind of stick with this and work it through. Okay. So let's do this as a large group. So I am going to type into this slide and fill out a table. What are some actions that you could take we're not going to do timeframes or accountability plans yet, but what are some actions you could take to enhance your skill of, do you guys want to do writing a fellowship or grant as an example? Yeah. So let's consider if that was your goal, improve my grant writing skills. Oops. What are some strategies that you would take? And here's a framework if you want to use it, or you can just share out strategies and I'm going to pop them into this table so we can start to see some different ideas. It says, again, you're going to want, for a skill, you're going to want to learn some new strategies. You're going to want to practice the skill, and you're going to want to get feedback from other people. Or feedback yourself somehow.
I know the NIH has a couple workshops, I think, on just like details on certain grants that they offer. I think I attended one. It's not so much about the writing, but at least it tells you about the details on like what people that have won it have often done, and I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so those might end up being strategies around submission or formatting your grant or managing your time leading up to the submission, which are all important parts of it. Mm-hmm. I see some ideas in the chat window too. So I see meet people who got the grant to get feedback. Yeah, absolutely. So people like peers that you know who've already been rewarded it. So you're showing your do you mean show your draft? Or ideas maybe, right? So sometimes it's helpful to talk to people before you've written a full draft so you can get some early feedback on your ideas. Oh yeah, reaching out for letters of support early, definitely a good skill or a good strategy to take. In this case, I mean, how are you going to develop the skills? So in one case, you might need to develop the skills for drafting a letter of support or requesting one. Yeah. What are other strategies you could take to learn how to write a grant more effectively? What could you do to learn that?
You can often see.
One thing I
Sophia,
did
do you want
recently,
to go first? Oh, Sabrina, you go first. Yeah.
sorry. One thing I did recently, because my F99 is like due next week, is after I got feedback from people, I started asking like why they made that change or why it was important. And it helped me learn the like logic that was driving their edits. And so it made it easier to edit other components of the grant alone, rather than just being like, thank you, and like kind of moving on to the next thing.
Yeah, getting that context and the comments on, trends in your writing or why they suggest certain edits is really, really helpful. I agree. My advisor tended to simply make the edits. And so I wasn't sure really why. It was more, I kind of left the situation being like, cool, my grant's now better. I'm not sure why he worked his magic, right? But that doesn't really
that's
help
what it
develop
kind of
a
feels
skill.
like sometimes. It just like goes into the black box and it comes out way better, but I don't know what happened in between there.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that I found over time is that some people are good at describing the why or the how or their own technique, and other people, they just kind of do the magic and they're not sure how to articulate why. So if you notice that, it's probably not you. It might just be that that's not a natural thing that they mentor around, in which case you might want to find other people who can also look at it and give you feedback for you to develop the skill. Yeah, that's great. Sophia, you also had some thoughts.
Sorry, actually, Edie's was put exactly what I was about to say, to get a draft from someone who has submitted that type of grant and try to mimic part of it, or sometimes that's what I've
Yeah,
tried
so
to do.
that's look at example grants to mimic in a way. Yeah, absolutely. And I see in the chat window, write a mini proposal of sorts. For example, you could practice writing like a specific aims page for something if you wanted to be practicing outside of actually applying for a larger grant. Yeah. So these are good ideas. So you can see that each of these are written with a verb at the front, right? And what you'd want to do is you could decide which of these actions works for you. And when you're doing a skill, at least, I would suggest looking for opportunities to practice and get feedback. So I feel like I've done enough talking for right now, and I would love to see you kind of move forward in creating your own. So before we do that, what I want to show you is one more thing. And that is that we were just brainstorming actions that we can take for the action plan. But what I talked about before is having, putting a time frame around the actions in your plan and thinking about an accountability plan. So we can use a template like this to map out a goal. So we talked about grant writing as a goal, but let's choose a different goal from the Miro board. So if you kind of look back at the Miro board, does someone want to call out a goal that we could work on as a group to map out an action plan? So it doesn't need to be a skill, it can be any kind of goal.
Publish a paper.
Publish a paper. All right. So Renee, tell me more about this goal. Or how would you get, or you can share,
I mean, it's
how would
not
you get
necessarily
started?
my goal, but so I think a lot of us are in the situation of we're collecting data, and I think the biggest hurdle in talking about this with my mentor has been, how do you know when you have enough data to be like, hey, publish this? Like this is what we consider a story. I think that's the hardest part in grad school has been, what is a story? Because in our lab meetings, a lot of us are like, oh, I understand what's going on, but then you present it to somebody completely new and they're just like, yeah, that didn't make any sense. And I think that was my main problem when initially writing my F31, is that everyone just kept saying, there's not a story here. And that's I don't know how to get someone to explain that except without like experience over time. I kind of understand what a story is, but it's still such a, yeah.
So I love that I asked you more about that, because I feel like it's what you just shared also got out the challenge, right? Like, why are you raising this example? But because I don't know, like, how do we figure out if it's a publishable story, right? Is it ready to be started to written up? So I almost think that that's like could be a goal in and of itself, right? Like, how do I figure that out for my own project? So let's help out. I think this is a common thing that many of us feel. If you wanted to if you had this goal, what are some actions you could take to define whether or not a story is ready?
There's a message.
There's a message in the
fine.
window. I can see the window now, which is so exciting. Present the data. So tell me more.
I just was thinking that if you have all the figures put together or mostly put together, you could start to see like if presenting it as a talk first makes sense of whether it is a full story, or if you could use the feedback to make it a story.
Yeah, I love that. What are other ideas here?
Organizing my thoughts is like something that helps me a lot, like writing my aims and then see if I have an answer for that aim, or if I did something to answer that aim.
Yeah, so write out kind of like your research questions or aims, and then what you know about that, or what you've
Yeah, like questions and responses. And then like in the middle, what did I did to answer that a specific thing? Because sometimes you have different aims, and what is very difficult is to put everything together. But at least starting with that is very helpful for me.
Yeah, I love that. You know what? That could even be like a concise sentence, even, right? Like, to answer this question, I did this and learned this, or something, right? Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is true, but I feel like the most recent feedback I've been getting with a lot of the things that I've been writing recently has been, I know that, the impact is important, but it's always like I'll have written the impact in there, and the feedback is you need a stronger impact. So kind of connecting the reason why, yeah, that, you know, the research question is important, the steps are important, but kind of tying it into like, why is this a big, like, why are we going to give you the money? Like, what big, broad question are you answering here? What problem do you solve?
Yeah, and I hear that you're talking about kind of grant writing, and it also applies to paper, because when people read a paper, they're like, why does it matter to me, right? Just like anything we write, you want to think about your audience and say, why do they care? So I'm actually going to move that in. Yeah, the impact for the reader. I mean, we can say for science, of course, but ultimately it's people reading a paper, right? And you want multiple people to be able to see the connection to their research or to the broader field. I love this. I love this additional context in the chat window also. This is great. I see another one from Erica. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think that when I was wrapping up my grad school paper, I think that talking to people that had published with my PI, so I think a problem sometimes is that your PI kind of defines when the story has ended. There's either like a time expires, or your PI is the one that's like, oh yeah, we're ready, or maybe they never feel ready. But I think senior people in the lab that have dealt with publishing before can be helpful in seeing, oh yes, the story is complete, or maybe you need like this one experiment to wrap this part up, and then that'll be your full figure or something like that. So I always found it helpful to talk to senior people in the lab, and that could be grad students or lab managers, or I don't know, other people also besides the PI. Sometimes that helps.
Yeah, that's great. And Adriana, you're saying kind of outline, maybe like outline a discussion section, which also gets to kind of like that impact. And, you know, so if you can write out a discussion section or outline that, at least that suggests that you might have a story here, because not only do you have results, but you have discussion sections about what does it mean and why is it important. Okay, so we're going to pause here, but the next step of this is to put these in an order and assign a time frame for each one of these actions, right? And the time frame might be like, you know, in October, I'm going to do this and this, you know, in November, I mean, whatever it is, right? So it doesn't have to be like by a specific day, although you can do that, but you can also just do months. So I'm wondering if any of you would like to volunteer to pretend to be the person for whom this is your goal and your action plan, and assign some time frame to each of these actions. How would you do that if this was your action plan? And you can even say, this is going to be my action plan, but I don't think I'm going to do this one action. I'm going to prioritize the other ones. That's okay. This is part of the process, right? We brainstorm, how can we do this? And then we decide the time frame and actually the priority for each of the actions.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I guess I love deadlines. Love and hate them. I feel like I would start off by making sure I can write my research questions and kind of the results and address them before I kind of go out to other people. So I think I would start with that and then try to build up some of the figures or things I could present at a talk. And then kind of at the same time, while I'm troubleshooting, I'll probably talk to senior members because they could probably add to what I'm currently thinking about. And then once I have those kind of built up, then I would go into like discussion section because I feel more strongly about those to then later maybe address to a PI or kind of have like a more concise idea of what I'm coming up with.
Yeah, I
At
love
least
that.
that's how I kind of think about.
Yeah,
Because
so
I kind of do
you're able to
things
kind of
at
take
the
this
same
brainstorm
time.
and put an order to it the way you talked it through. And some things are kind of around the same time. So that's great. And some of you, many of you might be thinking of a different way, right? So everyone works differently, but I love this. So thank you for sharing that. So let's give some time frames. You want to make some up?
Yeah. I think writing usually I take longer. Because English is my second language, so I think that's one of the things I do consider. And one of the things I think about is my idea correct versus my grammar? So I think I first start off with ideas and then kind of go into grammar, at least for myself. So I have been going. I also have obviously on my hopefully end years of my PhD. So I do reuse some of the stuff I've been working throughout the years to kind of troubleshoot my aims. So it kind of been developed. So I would say at least like 2 weeks of me going back and forth.
Yeah. So let's pretend in this pretend world that October's coming up. So let's say this is a pretty high priority for you. So you're going to get started next month, right? But I will say, you could say it's going to take me about 2 weeks. And right now I'm writing a grant. So I don't have to worry about I don't need to work on the paper right now, or I'm about to go on this big vacation or whatever it is, right? So I'm going to start doing this in December. So you can set goals and say, this is my start date. It's in the ahead of me, right? So I don't have to feel bad. It's not the time to work on this goal. I'm going to work on it in the future. But let's say we're going to start this in October. So you're going to spend 2 weeks of this in October, let's say. And so are you going to work on this, let's say October through November? Maybe. And then outlining the discussion section, I'm going to say in December. So you could finish this out before the end of the academic year. So as you do this kind of process, what I'm then going to say, so we've talked this through, and I've kind of put out a time frame here. How would you prioritize these? Are any of them higher priorities for you than others? Or do you kind of want to go through all these steps because you think they'll all be helpful?
I was gonna say I feel like they're all, but if everything is high priority, nothing is high priority. I kind of think of it that way.
Yeah, but you can, so this has a priority at the action level. You could also give a priority at the goal level, right? So you're going to do this for other goals, right? Like, well, I'm also drafting a grant. That's the highest priority right now, right? So this is a medium priority. This one about figuring out a story already. Does that make sense?
Yes,
so you can also do the priority level at the level of the goal.
Okay.
But I think for this purpose, I'm just going to give it a high, because that's what I think I heard from you. But I agree with you. As you map out your IDP, right? And let's say you fill out a table like this for each one of your goals, right? So this gives you a mini action plan for each one. Then you bring them all together and you're like, oh my God, I think they're all high priority. That might be too much for me. Maybe you're saying, oh yeah, and that's totally realistic. Or you might say, that is not realistic and I'm just going to feel bad. So let's just really think about what are the key priorities. And if you have, then you might feel more comfortable saying, well, relative to the other one, this one's a medium, right? Or whatever it is. Or if you have trouble with that, that's a great opportunity to talk to your mentors about that, right? So maybe you have a mentor who can help you identify what the priorities are, either from a career perspective, right? Or from a personal perspective, or like your advisor from the perspective of the research group or your role in the research piece, right? So you can get input from other people as to what the priorities are, let's say. Or they might say, these are good ideas, but I think there might be a better, more efficient way for you to accomplish this, and they can share a new strategy. Yeah. So the last step that I would do is I'm mapping out this little mini action plan for this one goal is I would think about an accountability plan. So what are ways that you can hold yourself accountable to following through on this set of goals, this action plan? Any ideas?
I actually do. Oh, I was gonna say I actually do what you mentioned. I do tell my PIs, I call it fake deadlines. So I will tell them this is due this day, and then I kind of have like a list of the dates, and I try to get that by that time because they're very busy. So both of them, and I have 2 PIs, so it's always fun.
Yeah. That's right. The fake deadline. It's like if you have a PI that's not likely to give you a deadline, you name the deadline yourself out loud or in email. And then all of a sudden you have to hold yourself accountable. Yeah. Great. Awesome. So this is kind of the process for making a mini action plan for a goal. So now we're going to pause for a break. And when we come back, you are going to map out your own action plan for a goal. I have a Google slide deck. So if any of you prefer to get started now, you can. But I think also breaks are super nice. So we don't want to minimize the break. But I'm going to put the link in the chat so that if you want to kind of get into that link and make sure it's working, you can. This is the link. So when we come back from the break, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go in here and each of you are going to claim a slide, and you claim it by putting your initials right in this little box right here. Okay, and that way you won't be editing in each other's slides, but each of you should get a slide, and then you can fill this out for a goal that you have for your own IDP this year. And so we're going to give it a stab, and then we'll go into small groups and you can discuss them a little bit. Does that sound good? All right. And if you want to tackle for this exercise a career development goal, that will lead really nicely into our next discussion about how can you explore career options and different things related to your career. So feel free to kind of take that angle here, because we're going to move our conversations in that direction also. So let's take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at, oh, it's 1:13. That doesn't make it round. Make sure you're back by 1:20 to start filling out your a slide here. Okay. All right. We'll see you soon. You can keep typing or you can pause. What we're going to do now is we're going to move to small groups so that you can show each other and talk through it a bit. So you're going to share your goal and the action plan for this goal. Listeners, take a look at the goal, the actions for the goal, and think about, like, are they following the SMART principle? Is it specific and measurable? Is there a verb where it starts with? Is it clear the action they're going to take? Is it realistic? And is there some kind of time frame? As you share about your goal, you feel free to share about, like, what challenges do you anticipate as you try to work towards this goal, and what resources or mentorship or other things might be available to support you as you kind of run up against these challenges. Okay, so I'm going to type this into the chat and hope that these prompts, I'm going to type this in the chat real quick while the groups are getting set up, but don't send them to the breakout groups yet, because I want to make sure that they have these prompts with them in the chat window. In hopes that Zoom won't delete it. It's been changing with its different feature, whether or not it lets you keep the chat. So here's the prompts. So you're going to be in groups of, what, 3 or 4 this time? And
yeah,
we're going to
3 or 2.
3 or 2, great. Okay, we're going to give you about 5 minutes in this group so you can share with each other and kind of discuss, move kind of past what's just in the table. People can kind of skim that a little bit and talk about applying the SMART principle. What challenges do you anticipate, and what resources or mentorship are available to help support you to reach this goal? All right, we'll see you soon.
You can pause the recording, Giovanna.
All right. So, so just to close out this part, before we move on to kind of broader, more career focused discussion, I want to check in with you all as to how this exercise went. Was there anything clarifying around doing this? Was there anything challenging around doing it? Or what questions arose for you? So I'm going to mute myself and you can jump in to share.
I think for me, it was very helpful. The only thing that I was like struggling a little bit with was like priorities, because like it's not the same as importance, and like something that is very important for me is having my green light meeting, but it was not the priority since it was like the last step. But I'm doing everything, like all the other things, I'm just doing that for, doing them for that reason. So that was a little challenging for me, try to like, categorize each step, if it was like high, low, or like medium, yeah, priority.
I'm just going to kind of keep myself muted for a minute just to hear some different reflections so you guys can hear from each other.
I don't know. For me, all the steps kind of seemed high priority. So it's like parsing out through the high priorities into like really high priorities. And like Audrey said earlier, like if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority kind of thing. So like really having to think through what my priorities are, I guess, was a lot more challenging than I thought it was.
Since this is coming up as a theme, I'm curious. Adding priority at the action level is a little bit new. So I was kind of experimenting with that. It might really make most sense at the goal level, maybe. And it might depend on kind of the action plan that you have and the type of goal you have. So it might be in some cases where prioritizing at the action level makes sense. And for other types of goals, it's just like, yeah, this is the sequence of things that I've decided to do. So that's the so I'm going to go through that sequence. So they all have the same priority, which is the priority level at the goal level. So don't feel like you need to set priorities at the action level. Totally fine to move that to the goal level. And all of these are just strategies to try, right? And to see what works for you. But we're trying to give you a framework to do things in a structured way. And kind of doing things similarly across the group will help you in the discussions in October also.
I guess adding to the priority, I also thought about like what I need to work more on, or like versus like, for example, like updating my CV, I put medium. That could be also low priority because I've been updating it throughout the years, so it won't take as much energy from me, but the actual thinking about what I want next might. Or identifying the skills and actual requirements, kind of, because my goal was to apply or interview for postdocs. Although we're in this course, I actually have to do the stuff that we talk about on the course. So I think that's been something that I've been thinking about. Okay, I have to sit down and do the actual things. So I use priorities like that this time rather than what needs to get done before or after.
Yeah, that's nice. Giovanna.
Listening to Adriana helped me think of something. I know that there are some things for me, some tasks that I'm less prone to doing because I dislike them or because I have some type of hang up about them. But I usually know which ones those are. So I think using this exercise to maybe put a timeline or a deadline on those in particular can be helpful. Otherwise, my tendency is to let those, continue to slide by and I don't do that. So maybe they're not urgent or super high priority, but if I know that if I don't put a deadline on them, they won't get done, that could be another way of prioritizing those.
I love that. It's almost like putting a gold star next to it. So in the grand scheme, of course, these other 5 things are really urgent and important, but this is an important but not urgent thing. And so I'm putting a gold star on it to make sure I don't forget it, or I remind myself that it's a really essential to me that I get this done, because it's going to be something that I'm more likely to procrastinate or feel uncertain about. I love that. Yeah. So that raises the kind of the prioritizing raises the kind of key point of thinking about that diagram. Have you seen that quadrant diagram? That's, like you could draw a box with 4 quadrants in it. Some goals are not important and not urgent to you, right? But we do them anyway, whatever. There's some things that are important, but not urgent. That tends to be professional development goals. There's the things in the paper that the collaborator really wants you to get the draft of to them right away. That's going to be important and urgent, right? urgent because someone's pushing you to do it, or you're going to get scooped, or whatever it is, and it's important to you too. Right. And then there's the urgent but not important to you types of things. There might be some things that people need from you or whatever that's urgent or that you have to do, but you're like, it's not that important to me, but you have to do them anyway. So a key thing throughout our professional lives is to kind of have a sense of that balance and where each goal kind of, or task that we're doing kind of falls in there. And I want to just highlight for you in the context of IDPs, professional development goals tend to be important to you, but not urgent to other people, and maybe not even urgent to you. So that's where they're at risk, like exploring career options, right? Well, it'll be a couple of years before I'm applying to positions. So it's not urgent, right? Even though it's important to you. So like it's easy to put off. And the challenge is that then when you come to a place where that professional development goal would have been, now it's becoming urgent, you might not have time to develop that network, or you might not have time to explore those options of fluidly, right? So kind of have a sense of, for your professional development, that it tends to be important but not urgent, and ways to hold yourself accountable to move forward in small ways at least. The eat the frog strategy, yeah. All right, so let's transition then with that in mind to thinking about career development. So we're going to bring you into groups just really briefly, and can come back to a larger discussion. Actually, you know what? Let's stay as a larger group. I think that'll be better for the time we have. And you guys already know each other and feel quite comfortable in sharing. So I'm going to share my slides real quick again. And we're going to kind of have one more discussion before we close out. So closing out what we talked about just now, I just wanted to share with you that what we talked about today is the start of our chunks of module 2. So module 2 was focused on pulling together your plan. And so if you want to think through more details around creating your plan, but also executing your plan and how to kind of overcome challenges, or, use your plan with your everyday calendar or some strategies like that, you can dive into videos and the sections as part of module 2. So that's there as a further resource. Within module 2, you'll see examples like this Gantt chart. That might be a typical Gantt chart for, an early stage scientist. And you can see that we've been using these tables to list our goals, but you can also visually show them as to when you'll be working on the goals. And this is called a Gantt chart, doing it this way. Really helpful for when you're drafting fellowships to put a Gantt chart for your timeline into your proposal. But having a visual like this can also be really helpful for sharing with someone in a conversation around what is your IDP, what are your plans for the year, what are your priorities, to get input from them on the bigger picture of how those goals fit together. I love Gantt charts too. So now in our remaining time together, I want to open the floor to questions or things that have arisen for you around career development. So when returning to module 1, well, first of all, we've been talking about setting goals, right? And we've had a fair amount of goals related to your projects, which are really important. And I also want you to be thinking about your next career steps. So all those types of goals and thinking about how your career wraps into your professional development is what module 1 was about, right? And that's a really important foundation for creating a development plan, right? It's really about how you're developing towards the goals that you have for the future. So again, in module 1, you reflected on your skills, your values, your interests, your needs, your preferences. You thought about, like, how ready am I? Do I have the skills to succeed in given roles that I'm thinking about? What have I heard from other people? What are some of the other factors I'm considering as I'm making kind of career decisions? And how have I made decisions in the past? So thinking about that, I want to open the floor to you all. What questions do you have around thinking about your career decision-making, your career exploration, developing your network, anything kind of around those very career-oriented spaces? And maybe let's start with maybe chatting into the chat window your questions, and then we can see if there's some themes, and I can kind of try to address them in themes. Okay, so take a moment to put any questions that you have around this into the chat window. We're not going to do a small group discussion, but, what challenges do you anticipate? What questions do you have? Some of those things in the chat window. So I'm seeing some themes coming up around, kind of trying to build a stronger sense of where you want to go in your career path. And in particular, kind of grappling with, I had some career goals and now are my interests changing? That's super common. Iris, I really appreciate your idea of including various other personal goals in your IDP or in a single Gantt chart. I love the Gantt chart because then you can kind of see all your goals visually in one place, and you can start to see, oh my gosh, like December is going to be a nightmare. I should rearrange my goals. But including things in your personal life, I definitely recommend that. At our campus, we map out our goals on a calendar. And I have the students first write in pen when they're going to take vacations or where there's conferences, because you also have to work around those things. Those are really important. Okay, so how do you have a sense of, I'd like to hear from you guys if you can unmute. Anyone can jump in, because I know this is an issue that lots of people face, right? What are some of your thoughts around not being sure about a career path, like having a sense that you want to move in a direction, but then having some doubts, and how to kind of find some clarity there? Would anyone like to share?
I think what was helpful for me was looking at like what their day looked like finding someone who had a job that I thought I wanted and just kind of figuring out like what their day-to-day looked like. What did they spend most of it answering emails? Were they working at the bench? Like that kind of stuff. And that's actually what made me realize like I don't want to be a medical doctor, is because like I shadowed doctors and I saw their day-to-day, whatever they had to do, and I was like, oh, I don't want that. But it was like helpful because like on paper it seemed really cool, but in practice it wasn't. So I think that's kind of how I figured out research was more for me.
I love that. I see echoes in Sophia's post as well, right? That like you have a sense of what you want to do, or like what the goals of your role might be, right? Like you want to, through your professional positions, you want to have this kind of impact, but then how do I find the role where the day-to-day parts are the parts that I like, so that I can then achieve that impact, right? Or the other day-to-day stress levels are where I want them, so that I can achieve that impact. Yeah, I will say that there's lots of ways, like if you have, like I haven't had a lot of interest in education related things, right? So I assumed, well, I guess I'll become a faculty member, of course, a faculty member with the kind of emphasis on education and mentorship. But what kind of balance between that and the research that I do? That's what I'm going to figure out. And so as I was doing my career exploration, I actually, by happenstance, found out about career development and professional development. And then as I was doing this as a volunteer on the side to also kind of help me figure out my own career path, I was planning events, right, as a student. I realized, hey, like we're writing out learning objectives. We're doing these things so we're having an educational impact with my peers, because we're learning about our professional development and growing as individuals. We're not learning genetics or, calculus or something, but we're still doing education. I'm still doing the big picture thinking of impact and educational goals that I want to be thinking about. The day-to-day is in this wonderful environment of student affairs. I'm able to see like frequent rewards through seeing individuals grow. So there's lots of things in the day-to-day that I really love while I'm having that impact. And I hadn't ever even thought about that as a career path. So there might be things that you learn about as you talk to people or just have great awareness around you, that because you have a sense of what impact you want to have and the types of goals or types of things that you want to be doing in your role, you can then have greater awareness when you learn about those types of paths. So just kind of being curious can help a lot in that kind of exploration stage. The other thing is there's some questions around like, I want to be a PI, for example, but I'm worried about that feeling stressful, right? If there's a thing that you've learned about a career path where you're like, I would really like that, enjoy that career path, except, right? Those exceptions, we often call disconnects. Like there's a disconnect with my value for having good work-life balance, or there's a disconnect because I've observed some toxic environments, right? Or there's disconnects because there's this high pressure for, applying, and I don't want that pressure in my life. Or there's a skills disconnect. I'm worried that I don't have strong enough grant writing skills, and that's going to be important to be a faculty member. Those are disconnects, and you can identify disconnects between your skills and a career path or a position, or your interests, what you like doing, or your values, or your needs and preferences. As you identify those disconnects, they can be really helpful to write down, make a list of disconnects and of your connects, like the ways that things match. But then for those disconnects, what I found to be helpful is to ask people about that. So when you do an informational interview by talking to people about their own role and career journey, as they warm up at the conversation, a little bit later in the conversation, you can ask them a question around disconnect. So for example, I understand, like, it seems to me, just observing as a student, that it can be pretty stressful to be a PI. Like, there's all this pressure to get grants, and sometimes you have to put out papers, knowing that you might have competitors or whatever the stressors you're thinking about, right? How have you managed the stressors kind of that are known for this type of role? What's your perspective around those? So asking about that disconnect from their own point of view of multiple individual people that you talk with one-on-one can help give you some really honest feedback and input about that. So they might say, yeah, I find those things super stressful too. Here's how I manage it. Or I find those stressful too, but I find that these rewards over here are totally worth it. Or they might say, those things don't bother me and this is why. Right? So they can share it with you. Again, learning around their career journeys and their different circumstances can help you. Or maybe you'll find out that those things you've observed are really only in certain environments and not in other environments. And there might be characteristics of a given employer that you can look into as you're looking for positions to see if that's the case. That's an example for being a PI, but as you can tell, like, that applies to any kind of position that you're exploring. The more that you learn something about something, the more you're also going to learn about things that you don't like about the role. And that's where you kind of test, are they reasons to not follow that position, or are there workarounds and things that I can use to make it manageable? Because no position's perfect. Yeah. Are there any last comments or questions that you have before we close out today? I'm going to share with you that we'd love your feedback. We oriented this workshop in a different way this time. So we would love your feedback on how it's gone for you. And I want to share with you next steps for what you can anticipate. You're going to have the peer mentoring discussion in October, middle of October, where you're going to return to your IDP. So we want you to finish refining your goals using the SMART principle. You can copy slides from, or mimic the tables that are in these slides if you find that helpful, or you can map them out however you want. As you do that, what I'd also encourage you to do is you're going to build out, your mini action plans for each goal. And now especially prioritize at the goal level, right? Like now, as I see this plan, this larger plan coming into focus, I'm going to take these actions for this goal, these actions for this goal. Think about how they come together in a chronological plan, whether it's realistic, the whole plan, when you look at everything together and all the things you wanted to do. Try not to get overwhelmed, because in reality, you were thinking about these things already. They were already in your head. You're just putting them on paper, right? So then think about, what are the priorities? If it does feel overwhelming and not realistic, where are the priorities? And then what resources are available to help you reach your goals? Those resources might be like, well, I need funding to go to a conference, or I'll need some assistance editing the grants that I need to work on. Or I'd like to develop this skill while I'm writing the grant. And so, I want to find peer mentors or others who can look for trends in my writing to help me improve my skill, right? Whatever it is. Or a resource I really need is time for my research to be able to build my teaching skills or whatever it is. So I'm going to need to talk to my PI about that and getting some time, so I can teach this course that happens every Friday. So think about the resources you might need to move forward with your plan. And think about ways you're going to hold yourself accountable. And again, where are the priorities for you? And then as you move forward in enacting your plan, right? If you are behind in your goals, I mean, to some extent, that's okay. It's up to you. You'll know if it's okay or not. But I think this is a natural part of things, especially if we've all made it to the PhD level. We're probably pretty high achieving people, and we probably tend to set pretty ambitious goals, which is a good goal setting strategy, to be honest. Research has shown is if you have an ambitious goal, you're more likely to drive towards it. So that's okay. But don't punish yourself if you don't reach goals, right? Learn from it. Say, you know what, I need to do better at this, right? Or what was happening for me or with external factors that impacted me being able to reach that goal? Learn from that experience, and don't be hard on yourself, right? Just kind of do better moving forward, right? And if you need to change your plan, that's okay. Just think about why you're making the change with the information at hand, and you're going to do something different from your plan. So be forgiving of yourself and also prioritize your wellness. You can list your wellness goals as part of your goals in your IDP. Your wellness is really, really important. Another piece is to advocate for yourself, right? Watch for lucky opportunities, take those opportunities, reach out to people, and identify multiple mentors. You'll talk more about mentoring even in October, but really thinking about how mentors align with your IDPs can be really helpful. And then this was brought up at the beginning. It is an iterative process. So I found that every 6 to 12 months is helpful to kind of just take a step back, maybe look at my prior IDP, but also just start from scratch and I tend to start mapping out my broad goals and my action plans and where are my priorities right now and how do I want to move forward. So kind of being in that growth mindset and just kind of constantly being willing to forgive yourself, learn from your experiences, and move forward towards your goals. Yeah. So I think with those parting words, I'm going to sign off. Well, I'll stay on if you have questions, but it's been really lovely to meet you. And I want to wish you really a lot of good wishes on your career development. So thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. And thank you, everybody. We'll send more instructions via email, but for now, thanks for being here and for participating.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, y'all. See you later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Oh, Cynthia, I have one question. Oh.
Yeah, hi.
Oh, sorry. I have one question. When it comes to like having multiple goals and when it comes to putting them all together, obviously like your last year of PhD or your last two are gonna be intense either way.
Yeah.
How did this one like identify like these are either too much or too little goals? Like once you have them all together, because I feel like I do over like I do over plan also. Like I don't know, like the in between of over planning and then on top of that, too many goals. So like, do you have any tips for that?
Yeah. Something I think you learn over time what your own goal setting styles and preferences are and what your tendencies are. And that's super helpful to know, right? Something that I've learned is that I like to set ambitious goals. And then that's part of what drives me and gets me excited about things. And so knowing that though, is important for me also to recognize, okay, so I need to though recognize that and say no to things, or do you know what I'm saying? Like I just need to know that about myself and communicate it to other people if I need to, who are on teams with me. So how do you know if a plan is realistic or not?
Yeah.
I think talking to mentors can be super helpful, actually, right?
Okay.
Sometimes those mentors might be like more senior students or postdocs, right? Or a mentor you feel comfortable like with sharing your full plan, right? Like if you can make a one-pager, like in a Gantt chart or in a brief list, something that gives them an overview of it, and you can say, I'm worried that this might not be realistic, or do you have any suggestions for how I might prioritize things if I come up against challenges?
Okay.
Even just talking through that and then responding can even push you to say, well, I hear what you're saying, but now that you're pushing back on this set of goals, I'm realizing how important those are for me. And just that back and forth can be almost like an improvisational conversation. It can push you to think about your goals in new ways, and just talking it through with someone can then help you recognize in yourself internally where the priorities are. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, thank you so much.